YouTube, this is LA Prepper, and wasn't necessarily planning on making another video this morning, but I saw a very interesting article. More than 800 West Hollywood buildings could collapse in a big quake. Uh-oh. What we have here is a classic example of a soft story. I'm surprised they don't mention it in the they don't mention it here, but this story, structurally speaking, is garbage. You're going to get a little... So there's a few different ways that buildings collapse, but one way is just like compression, right? If the building's too heavy, it'll just fall, but that's not the most common thing in the world. In an earthquake, the building is either going to shake like this, or, let's see, P wave and S... How many different types of earthquake waves are there? I want to say there's three: pressure, S waves, and P waves. P waves, F waves, surface waves. Okay, P waves. Okay, here we go. So P wave is a pressure wave. That's back and forth. S wave is an up and down wave. And the surface wave is kind of a cyclical wave. So, back to the picture of the structure. If it gets pushed back and forth, either, this way or like diagonally, there's a type of strength in engineering called shear strength, which is if you want to, so like if I have a piece of paper, right, if this piece of paper represents the wall, it's obviously not very strong in pushing direction, but shear is like trying to sort of force it to move like this. So if I take the right side and try to rotate it right and try to take the left side and rotate it right, obviously it's a piece of paper, so it's not very strong in shear, but maybe I can do something a little better with the towel. So shear is kind of like this direction, right? Along the wall, movement along the wall. So what happens is when you have a solid wall, you have good resistance to shear, like this back wall, this side wall right here, and the garage. But these little columns provide basically no shear. They'll provide a little bit, but not nearly enough. So there are laws in California. So under a new law, the building need to be professionally evaluated. Man, that's going to be a lot of headaches for some apartment buildings. 90% of 820 buildings on the list are wood frame structures with carports on the ground floor. Yeah, it's the carports are causing the issues because there's not enough shear bracing. Now, could they have been designed to have better shear? Yeah, if you had more walls like this wall right here, if you had more walls like that, and had more bracing like this, if these columns were a little tougher, you could kind of get around it, but they're really not very well designed. So what's going to happen, this whole building is going to shake, and it's going to stress out the top and the bottom of all these columns, and it could potentially crack and cause some real issues. Here's a map of some of the vulnerable buildings. One good shaker without seismic reinforcements could bring many of those buildings into being red tagged and having to be demolished, thus wiping out a good portion of our affordable housing stock. As if affordable housing is the biggest issue here. I think the fact that all these buildings are going to be destroyed, it's going to displace all these people, displace a bunch of citizens. is a nightmare, just a complete nightmare. Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of what happens is the whole building shakes, and then you have issues with the soft story. In fact, I wonder if I can find a good video on it real quick. Soft story earthquake danger. Here we go. This is a engineering video of it. This is a very boring video. Oh, here we go. Okay, so they're shaking the building. You can see on the bottom here, it's a bunch of crap soft story. Oh. Boom! And that's what happens. Interestingly, the upper part of the building stays mostly in one piece. But, yeah, bad news bears. Bad news bears for all these structures in Los Angeles. So I'll let you read through the article a little bit. Another interesting piece here. Some older concrete buildings are known to have a key flaw, lack of enough steel reinforcing bars. Ooh, that's not good. To prevent concrete exploding out of columns when shaken. Ooh. Yeah, a big earthquake in LA is going to be a nightmare. Here we have another
with the USGS, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about soft story buildings and why and what is the issue with soft story buildings. Can you explain what this is?
There are a lot of these buildings all around, not just Southern California, but really all around the world. Apartment buildings, for example, that have a rigid upper series of floors where people live, and then down on either the ground level or underground, they'll have these spindly small supports. You know the kind of buildings I'm talking about. There's so many of them around LA. A lot of newer buildings have a very sturdy ground floor for their parking, and those are fine. What we're talking about here is the older ones. So when an earthquake hits and you get the violent shaking, you can see how that weak structure on the first floor is just flimsy, and that's a real problem. And you can even get a collapse. Like this is what happened in the Marina District in 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. The buildings at the street corners lurched out like this, and in some cases even covered up fire hydrants, which exacerbated the problem. So what we want to do is stiffen up a structure like this. It's not that hard, it's not that expensive, and it can even be done while people are living in the building. But imagine putting in some supports just like this in this model, and here you're just strengthening it up, and by doing that, you can really prevent a lot of damage in the future. So there are a number of companies around that specialize in doing these seismic retrofits, and so the idea is to have a program that's now mandatory in the city of Los Angeles to stiffen up the structure. So you can see how if the ground shakes now, the building is much more rigid. And that's the whole idea of it, is to just stiffen up that first story. So instead of a soft first story, now you've got a rigid first story. The whole thing is going to ride through a future earthquake much better.
excellent excellent explanation. And as he was saying, retrofitting it is not the biggest nightmare in the world. It's certainly better than having to if the building collapses, if your building ends up looking like this, you're essentially going to have to demolish the whole building. There are not, after such a big structure, after such a big structural failure, the chances, even if the most of the top of the building is, looks like it's in one piece, the chance that A, you could find a company that would be willing to jack it up, and B, that it wouldn't be condemned, are relatively low. Jacking up the building, technically speaking, is not that difficult of an issue, but the thing is, after the building collapses like that, it is very likely going to be considered condemned. So the construction cost, jacking it up is going to be costing several hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even $500,000 to try to do that. But the bigger issue is that it's very likely the rest of the structure is going to be condemned, and the city's going to require it to be torn down because buildings just aren't designed to fall and then take a big impact like that. So very, very interesting article, and I'm glad that this kind of information is getting a little bit of press because it's a very serious issue in California. We don't think about earthquakes that much. We have a lot of little earthquakes, but we don't have big earthquakes very often. Of course, the better we can prepare for a big earthquake, the less of an issue it's going to be. And since, I live in a soft story structure, luckily my building is only 1 story above the soft story, so it's not as bad. And I'm actually, if you were going to kind of X-ray vision through here, we have a solid wall all the way along the back, and then I have a solid wall right here. So my part of the apartment is doing a little bit better, but there is actually a lot of settling in my apartment, which is why things like this door doesn't close very well. In fact, it's a little hard to tell, but this door has already been cut. This distance, in fact, where's my ruler here? I don't know if you can tell by looking at it, but the distance between the top of the door and this little trim detail is about 4. It's not 4.5, is it? Oh, this ruler has really awful half marks. The half marks are supposed to be bigger than the other marks. That's a little aggravating. So that's 4 3/8. Over here, it's 4. So that's 3/8 of an inch lower on this side than that side. That's a lot in construction. To have the frame drop 3/8 inches. And of course you could see, excuse me, a little bit of cracking here. This building has all sorts of serious structural issues. You can see more cracking here. So what's happening is the floor that's supporting this in between the columns is cracking, and it's causing a myriad. In fact, you can see more cracking here, And unless the owners of this building really should get an engineer to come look at it, but they're cheap and they're not going to. And unless there's a big earthquake, it probably won't collapse. I mean, if there was a big enough earthquake, do I think that the middle of my floor would crack and break through? Do I think this whole apartment would collapse? Probably not. Probably not. But if it was a big enough earthquake, it would definitely cause considerable structural damage. It would displace me, that's for sure. God forbid I didn't displace me. I'd have to live with months and months of awful construction noise. So, anyway, just thought I would share this with you, YouTube. If you live in a soft story, you might want to think about that. Of course, that's why it's nice to have a homestead and a ranch-style home, 1 story. Don't have to worry as much about earthquakes. In fact, with a ranch-style home, you really don't have to worry about earthquakes at all. It's not going to fall over. You're not really, as long as it's a somewhat modern-built house. Even houses built in the 40s or 50s that are 1 story are very earthquake-resistant. So, till next time, YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and if there's an earthquake and you're in a soft story, if you're in the carport, get out of the carport. I know they say you should duck and cover and hold on to something, but if you're in a carport in a soft story area, get the heck out of there. Not safe. Till next time, like, comment, subscribe, watch out for those earthquakes and other natural disasters, and keep prepping.